Hey there folks, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and I'm regularly asked questions about Hell Let Loose, Postscriptum, Squad, and many other tactical shooters in terms of simple or rather advanced things in how you can change your gameplay to improve as an individual player or just progressively get better. Now, whether you're a veteran of one of these games or somebody who's only just started getting into it, today I thought I'd bring you some simple tips and tricks that would make you a significantly better player in Hell Let Loose. I consider these things for me to be sort of passive thoughts that I don't necessarily put into words, but it's things I do whilst I'm playing, and it's things I do consistently that I feel makes my situation much better as an individual player and keeps me safer, makes me more able to get shots off and take out opponents, and that's what I wanted to share with you today. Consider these sort of unconscious thoughts that I do in-game that I've decided to speak on a little bit more. The first major tip I have for you guys is all to do with the movement system in this game, and this is something that I feel is kind of complex to get your head around, because Hell Let Loose almost presents itself as this hybrid casual slash hardcore shooter that's sort of in the middle. But in terms of the movement system of the game, it is fundamentally a hardcore shooter that requires really intelligent positioning of an individual player in order to take out lots of opponents. And the reason I say this is because ultimately in a game like Hell Let Loose, where the time to kill only takes a bullet or two each to kill an individual opponent, it's actually more down to what you do surrounding the gunplay rather than the actual gunplay itself, such as positioning, movement, and flanking and other things of that general variety. And there are two main things when it comes to movement that I feel makes people a better player. The first one is bounding, and the second one is consistency of movement. So what do I mean by bounding? Well, bounding actually, I suppose, kind of is a military term, but what I mean by it is the ability to stop in a location, see your next target location, and bound to that location with a certain degree of safety. Whether that's safety of friendly players looking after the position you're running towards, people, giving you some kind of suppressive fire, but most of the time I do it in terms of just waiting to see what the situation looks like and what it presents to me. I always move cover to cover, I always make sure that where I'm going to doesn't seem to have any active opponents, and I make sure that I give myself ample time to make sure that I know that's the case. I'm not running from cover to cover every 10 seconds, I'm running to a piece of cover, I'm waiting for 30 seconds or more, looking around, scouting out the location, looking to see if anybody fires at anything, and then I'm moving again. When you're moving in a game like Hell Let Loose, you have to move from one position of safety to another position of safety, and the only caveat to that rule is when you're moving from a position of safety to a position of opportunity. And what I mean by that is that you're going to be in a threatening area where you could die, but you're doing it because an opportunity presents itself, like being able to ambush lots of enemies. So bounding is critically important. Don't constantly catch yourself just constantly moving, don't constantly sprint towards locations. Take time. Think about the situation, look around the surroundings, and see what's happening around you in order for you to make that logical leap to the next position of cover. And what do I mean by consistency of movement? Well, it kind of links into bounding. I actually say less is more when it comes to Hell Let Loose, because a game like Hell Let Loose is very difficult to see opponents in, You only really catch an opponent out the corner of your eye when a significant amount of movement disrupts a certain pattern. And again, I always mention this in a lot of my videos, this is simply just a scientific thing. The brain is built to detect and identify different patterns, whether that's faces, movement, or anything in between, and ultimately because of that, when you notice a disruption of the pattern, it's drawn towards your eye. And that's why less movement is more, because if you see a bush line and something is still and doesn't move, then you won't notice a disruption in pattern. And this can be coupled very well with lighting sources as well. For example, if I'm looking at a bush line and it's shadowed in and I can't really make out colors and stuff like that in that general location, then I won't see anything. But if I do see a bright tan or green soldier with white skin, it's quite easy to catch them out and be like, oh, that's a disruption in the pattern. So consistency of movement's very important. I would say across the board, less is more in this category, and you shouldn't be moving over the top constantly because that's something that catches out in the eyes of opponents. This ties into my next tip, which is combat readiness, and I see this fail far too often in the eyes of most other players and what they do and how they move in this game. Combat readiness is something that you need to actively have in the front of your mind whenever you're moving. When I move into a precarious situation, a building, a house, or, just somewhere that I'm not sure is secure in terms of if there's friendlies there or enemies there, I'm not sprinting. I'm always having my gun at the ready. I'm always ready to aim down sight and make a shot if necessary. 9 times out of 10 in a game like Hell Let Loose, Postscriptum, or Squad, it's actually sprinting that gets you killed. It's the inability to react to gunfire while somebody is standing right in front of you. And that's because if you're constantly moving, you're never able to get your gun sights up quickly enough in order to counteract opponents. And that's a serious problem that a lot of people struggle with, I feel. When you're crossing corners, crossing open terrain, moving between buildings, or moving between any kind of area that presents itself as a threat, you should always be actively ready to be able to aim down sight, or at the very minimum provide some kind of accurate hip fire. It will save you in a lot of situations, and it means you'll win more one-on-one engagements because you'll be more ready than the opponent facing you. When we're talking about movement as well, I do have 2 more notes on that. The first one is cutting sight lines, and the second one is the use of concealment. When I talk about cutting sight lines, I don't think people really understand what I'm talking about. And you'll notice whenever I play this game, I crouch run quite a lot, even when I'm seemingly in terrain where crouch running perhaps doesn't make a lot of sense. And the truth of the fact of the matter is that if you are crouch running, you are half the height of your regular character model, and that gives you a huge advantage because, you know, you have to think of your space as an enemy player, as a friendly player, as a sort of 360-degree camera. Presume that you are being looked at from every single angle. Presume somebody is always watching you from one kind of angle or another, and ultimately you'll be able to cut off as many sightlines as possible. My best combat scenarios are when I am controlling the situation and I am controlling the sightline, whether that's looking around a corner or, you know, in a piece of cover where I can peek it, and ultimately that's superior positioning. That's something that you can do. So if you can cut down your sightlines by crouch running and moving to cover, and just making sure there aren't, you know, this massive open field or open field of view where people can see everything that you're doing, then chances are you'll get spotted less. Crouch running is a great example of this. I also think moving slowly is a good example of this, and moving cover to cover, because you can significantly reduce the number of sightlines on you and the number of people who could possibly see you and therefore possibly kill you. To this end, concealment is also quite important because bush lines, things like long grass and, you know, just general rubble and things will actually help you blend in to some degree. What I always highly motivate people to move towards is actually shadows, because I find shadows to be a great consistency of cover. So if you are moving into concealment, look for darker places instead of lighter places, because you'll be less likely to be seen in those scenarios and more tricky to be seen when you're obscured by both lighting and vegetation. Finally, and I get this question all the time, I'm always asked, what do I do when it comes to shooting? Do I do anything special? And the truth of the fact of the matter is, I do absolutely nothing special in Hell Let Loose. You know, I take my time with my shots and my bursts, and I think when I'm shooting, I feel like it's something that's kind of underrated, but people tend to believe in a game with such a fast TTK that you just point at opponent and opponent dies. And simply that's not the case, because each individual weapon that you have has its own quirks, its own drawbacks and problems that make it a unique scenario to that specific weapon. For example, I know for a fact that if I'm using the M1, I know that sometimes that thing, although it's incredibly powerful and has a fast bullet velocity, if you fire it too consistently and you don't leave pacing between your shots, the gun will kick up in a way that makes it impossible to hit anything. The same thing applies to the BAR, where if you fire short bursts, you will hit your targets, but if you're looking for consistent long fire, ultimately, you're not going to hit anything. The same applies to the thing like G41s, MB40s, and ultimately burst firing and understanding the pacing between shots means you'll be a more accurate player. Especially in long-range engagements, which tend to be the vast majority of scenarios in this game, I find personally it's the person who's more accurate and takes their time to get the shot off that wins the engagement, rather than the person who thinks they're just going to turn a corner, flick shot somebody from 200 meters away and win the engagement. That's the kind of philosophy I bring forward. I take my time with my shots, I don't rush myself, I wait for opportunities where players present themselves, and if they're in cover, I wait for them to move out of cover, I don't want to reveal my location. So that's really my shooting mantra, and I think it's something that's very important and often overlooked in these kind of things. So folks, that's about it really. These are really simple things that can ultimately make a lot of difference to your gameplay, and for that reason I felt like this video was quite crucial to make, because it's something that can help everybody with something just as simple as a little extra layer of thought when you do things that can really make an impactful difference on the gameplay that you have and how often you win situations. And I honestly feel as though, simple learning curves like this can be applied to most hardcore and tactical shooters, so feel free to use them there too. As always folks, leave a like and a subscribe, and if you want to see more gameplay of hardcore and tactical shooters, as well as lots of knowledge videos like these, feel free to subscribe to see more. And yeah, catch some of my streams at 6 to 8 PM UK time, where we talk about these things there as well. As always folks, thank you for watching, have a good one, and I'll catch you in the next video.